What's going on, guys? Got some new cards today to reveal. First up, we have the Plague of Flames. This is a Warlock 1 mana spell. Destroy all your minions. For each one, destroy a random enemy minion. Right, it's a very powerful effect for the mana cost, especially if you're running a lot of tokens. This can really swing the board. One thing this struggles with is if you're already ahead on board, it is pretty much unplayable because, say you've got like a Twilight Drake or a Giant on board, you really don't want to be sacrificing that to clean up the opponent's side of the board. So it's kind of like, when you use this, it's kind of like a Pyro Equality effect, in that you want to reset the entire board really and then go from there. So in terms like of the zoo deck, although they do run a bunch of tokens, they're usually ahead on board, I'd say, given their aggressive nature. So a card like this is going to be pretty dead a lot of the time, and it's not really something you want to be playing. It's more of a control style Warlock card, but that kind of butts heads a little bit with tokens, because control style Warlocks don't typically go very wide on board. They don't run a lot of tokens. They tend to run narrow big minions, so you'd think that this card doesn't fit too well into that sort of deck. But I'd say there's a few cards which kind of change that. The main one I'd say is Reform Scheme. Reform Scheme hasn't really seen a ton of play at all, or really any play, rather, in the latest expansion. But I don't think it's a bad card. I just think the rest of the control Warlock isn't quite there, and this card might be able to help it get there. If you ever looked at like Reform Schemes, like mulligan win rates and drawn win rates, they were pretty high on like HS Replay and in the decks that it was featured in. The idea being you're going to be life tapping a lot in a hand locked deck, so you're more likely to draw Reform Scheme plus this. Once your Reform Scheme gets running, turns 4 or 5 maybe, you can combo the scheme with Plague of Flames for like a complete reset of the board, which is very powerful against giants in Mage. Currently, control style Warlocks just get absolutely out-tempoed by the giant conjuring turns, and this is a great way to reset the board. Comes down way earlier than Twisting Never and for cheaper. Other than Reform Scheme, there is a 4 mana card which summons 4 1/1 imps, which you could maybe pair with this. Not 100% on that, whether that's strong enough. There's other cards like Microtech Controller, there's Lackey Generators. You could run just the egg plus Evil Genius to proc the egg and then maybe AoE the board, or just AoE with an egg and then you're left with some 1/1s afterwards as well. You don't really need to get a lot of value out of this card. You can use it like a deadly shot with a Lackey or something if your opponent has just one big minion, which is really good tempo. I think this is a very, very, very strong card. If you're running all the tokenly stuff in your Warlock deck, it kind of makes sense to run Demon Bolt as well. It's something I've experimented initially in a handlock builds from the start of the last set. In the end, they didn't turn out to be that strong, but one of the synergies that I found was very strong was Reform Scheme and Demon Bolt. It just adds to really insane tempo swings in the mid game. Say you do your big develop tokens turn and Demon Bolt something, and then your opponent, puts a bunch of stats onto the board. Well, on your next turn, you can just go face with whatever 1/1s you have left, play this for 1 mana and completely reset the board, and then develop whatever you want afterwards, which is going to be really powerful. I'd say something this card does suffer against is very spread wide tokeny decks. It doesn't really help you too much against them. Usually, if you're developing a bunch of tokens into tokens, well, those trades are going to happen anyway, so there's not a huge incentive to use Plague of Flames to reset the board that way. So if you're against like a deck which runs a huge amount of lackeys, Plague of Flames is probably not going to be the best AoE skill. Really excited for this card. I think it's very, very strong. Reminds me so much of quality combos, but I think Like Reform Scheme is one of those cards that I really think is good, but it just hasn't had the chance to shine, so I'm just really hoping I'm right about that. Next up we have a Druid card, Anubis Defender, 5 mana, 3/5, Taunt. Cost 0 if you've cast a spell that costs 5 or more this turn. Alright, so this is pretty close to a reprint of Arcane Tyrant, which was a 5 mana 4/4 version of this without the taunt, essentially. But it was a neutral card. And that card was very, very strong in Druid, particularly when they had Spreading Plague, pre-nerf Nourish, and the big one, Ultimate Infestation. They don't have access to those cards right now. Though they do. This next card is getting close to UI in terms of power level. Not as strong, I don't think, but it seems like a good card to pair with this. Other than that, there isn't a Spreading Plague, and Nourish is a bit iffy whether you want to run it. So it's not a slam dunk. This is going to be a super strong card, as Arcane Tyrant was when that was released. But I think this card will still be good. There is the new Druid card they released, Forbidden Oasis, which starts to look... Oh, Hidden Oasis, apologies. Which starts to look a lot stronger when you are running these 0 mana 3/5s in your deck. You're going to get a bit more tempo than you would normally. So there's an application there. There's also the 6 mana spell, I can't remember exactly the name of it, where it summons a beast from your hand for 6 mana and gives it rush. That is pretty strong with this as well. I think that card is fairly decent, especially if you run a lot of card draw, which you will be with the next card, Overflow. If you're rushing out those 7/7 beasts which summon a 5/5 with Overkill, and you summon a 3/5 taunt, maybe follow up with Overflow to heal up you guys, it's gonna potentially be really strong. Yeah, definitely a strong card. Just depends whether this style of Druid will make a return. Spreading Plague was one of the, and UI were one of the key factors in making that deck viable. Without Spreading Plague, the card's a lot worse. As well as like the Wild Growth nerf and the Nourish nerf. I mean, the power level's definitely gone down, but cool card. I'm a little bit disappointed that they've just kind of gone in the same direction with Druid, as we've already seen. Like, these two cards are just so similar to what we've seen in past Druids that it's a bit boring, to be honest. Like, we faced against the UI tempo swing style Druid for so long, and it's not been out for that long from the meta game. So to see a return to very similar cards, I'd say, is a little bit disappointing. Okay, next card is Overflow, which is close to UI. It's like scarily so. It's a 7 mana card, restore 5 health to all characters, draw 5 cards. Important to note, it is all characters, so you will be healing your opponent and your opponent's minions. If you're playing a slower style Druid deck, it is pretty likely you're behind on board. So if your opponent has just taken some value trades, this is going to negatively impact you a fair amount. The heal 5 is nice because it's usually probably going to benefit you more as you're playing a slower style Druid deck, so you want to get the healing. You're not too fussed about your opponent's health at that point. I mean, sometimes the restoring health to your guys will help if you're ahead on board, but that's probably going to be less of a case than the reverse, I'd say. A couple of classic cards or basic cards you can compare this to. Sprint in Rogue, which is 7 mana, draw 4 cards, nothing else. But you could use prep with that. That's not the strongest of cards. It has seen a bit of fringe play, but only when it was paired with preparation. It's not so good on 7 mana on its own. But Rogue didn't have this card to cheat out when you did it. When you do play Overflow, you're going to draw 5 cards. So either you've already got one of these in hand, or you're very likely to draw into one of them. So the tempo loss you that you have from playing a 7-mana card is going to be regained from playing a 0-mana 3/5 a lot of the time. And you're going to heal yourself up as well, so you can oftentimes afford to play this draw card and not worry about dying, because you're going to have taunts and you're going to have a bit of life gain as well. Seems like a very, very powerful card. You can also compare it to Lay on Hands in Paladin, which was an 8-mana draw 3, restore 8 health, which almost always went to your own face. So this is cheaper, it restores a little bit less health, and it does restore it to your opponent, but it draws 2 more cards for a mana less, which is a great trade-off. And Druid, like, it has better synergies with cards like this than Paladin does, I think. You can maybe pair this style of Druid deck with mana ramp, like Wild Growth. Wild Growth for 3 is a bit iffy as a card. It might still make the cut. Biology Project is probably not going to see play, I'd imagine. The downside of giving your opponent mana crystals, even though they might be running a lower curve deck than you, is still really, really bad. Even though it gets you to the cards like this sooner, I don't think it's what you want. Innovate might see play in that deck though, just to get out Innovate Overflow or Innovate Nourish or something to get you towards your late game stuff a turn earlier. Yeah, so these two seems like a really strong Druid pairing, and it's going to probably be the baseline for a lot of Druid decks going forward. Next card we have is Micro Mummy. This is a 2-mana 1/2 reborn Paladin card. At the end of his turn, give another random friendly minion +1 attack, and it's a mech. So it kind of looks like every class is getting a mummy of some sort. We got this priest mummy. I think there was a warrior mummy revealed right at the start. Restless mummy here. So I wouldn't be surprised if at least most of the classes are seeing some kind of mummy reborn card. And this is Paladin's one. It doesn't seem like the strongest, in my opinion. Obviously it's a mech, so you could run it in Mech Paladin, but I think there's a couple of issues with that. The first of all is I don't think you want to draw this off Christology. I think you want your Christology to hit Galvanizer and your 1-cost mechs pretty much always, because it's just way better tempo. If you add this to the pool of things, yes, you're less likely to completely whiff on your Christology, but that doesn't happen very often. But what's going to happen is you're going to miss Galvanizer way more often, because you can draw this card and you can draw your 1-drops and you maybe don't hit a Galvanizer at all, which is a problem. The second problem I see is that you rarely, at least early on in Mech Paladin, have multiple minions on board. So this +1 attack at the end of the turn is just not going to hit anything. Usually you're going to be stacking minions on top of each other with the magnetization, but you won't have 2 minions until at least the mid game. So this is effectively doesn't have text other than the reborn in that circumstance, which means the power level of it goes down a bunch. And finally, when it comes to Kangor's Endless Army, if you have this card and it dies, it's gonna come back without magnetization as just a 1/2, which means when it dies, there's just a 1/2 mech in your pool a lot of the time, because when your opponent kills this, at least the first half, they're gonna probably kill the 1/2 as well, so you can't magnetize onto it. So it means when it comes to playing Kangors, there's a higher chance that you whiff on one of your mechs, so you just resummon a 1/2, which is going to really suck for you. So there's a few reasons why I don't think this card's very good in the deck that you'd probably most associate it with, which is a mech deck. On the other hand, I think you could probably run, or you kind of have to run this card if you're going for the Paladin quest. If you pair this with Mermy, they're both 1 attack reborn minions, so you can tutor them from Christology. something you want to be running in that deck. And then you are on your way to completing the quest. So I think this card probably sees play in Quest Paladin. Although, if you're playing the quest on turn 1 and this on turn 2, again, the buff's not going to land on anything. So it's a bit of a miserable looking card in that regard. But if you compare it to something like Haunted Creeper, it's the same card with mech synergy, but one less death rattle. And you sometimes get this +1 attack thing. So it's not like, as a standalone minion, it's not the absolute worst card in the world. But I think in the quest thing, if you go in quest turn 1, this and turn 2, it's kind of slow. And you're likely to fall behind on board. But I think if it's going to find a home, it's going to be within that deck. I'm not too keen on that being a very strong archetype. Next up, we have a warrior weapon, Livewire Lance. After your hero attacks, add a lackey to your hand. It's a 3-mana 2/2 weapon. Right, so kind of almost forgot that warrior was a lackey class after the last expansion, but they are. And this is a fairly strong weapon, I would say, in generating lackeys. You can kind of think of generating a lackey as similar to draw a card. In the early game, I would say it's better than drawing a card, as we've seen from Evil Cable Rat being played over Novice Engineer in a huge amount of decks. So you can imagine on turn 3, if this weapon said, after your hero attacks, draw a card, I think people would be losing their minds. But for some reason they're not when it says lackey. But I think this is a stronger effect in the early turns. And it seems like a really strong card. The only downside, I think, with it is that for 3 mana, 2 attack on a weapon doesn't really contest on curve minions. They're usually going to have 3 or 4 health, so you're going to need a little bit of help in terms of killing them. When it comes to tokens, there's lackeys for the most part, which have only 1 health, so you're kind of wasting the 2 attack of this to kill lackeys. So the 2 attack is at a kind of a bad spot, especially for 3 mana in this meta game, where you're overkilling tokens and you haven't got enough attack to kill on curve threats, which is a bit of a problem in the card. If you're playing a tempo style deck which values going face, you can just swing this to face and it's fine. In that regard, you're not losing out too much there, and you're generating lackeys, which is going to help you with the board. The lackeys themselves, especially the damage lackey, help with the board. If you on turn 4 and you play this and you get the damage lackey, you can help clean up a target. Although if you haven't generated a lackey and you swing this into a minion, you don't know what lackey you're going to get. So if you don't get the lackey you want, you might just be taking extra damage for no real reason. But it depends how much you believe, I guess. If you believe in the RNGesus, you just swing into that 3/4 on turn 4. Other synergies with this, you can upgrade it with Upgrade or Captain Greenskin, which seems really good because 1, it gets it into that 3 attack range, which I was talking about earlier, and 2, you just generate extra resources off it. Seems like a strong card. I don't know if you want to run it in control style decks. They tend to have a lot of their mana booked up on turns 4 and 5, in that they want to play Dynamatic and Militia Commander. So it's a bit hard to fit in a lackey anyway, and this thing doesn't cleanly kill things. They usually won't have a bunch of stuff to on board to help them trade into stuff, so this might not make the cut in a slower style warrior. But if we're talking about a tempo style warrior, which seems to be emerging from this set, particularly with this new card here, which I'm very excited about, I think that style of deck will want to be running Livewire Lance. It could be good. Next card we have Desert Spear. It's 3 mana hunter weapon. After your hero attacks, summon a 1/1 locust with rush, and locusts are beasts. 1 mana beasts. This card I think is very good. It doesn't suffer the same penalties as Livewire Lance does, particularly. Obviously you can't kill on curve threats, but this is much better at killing tokens, I'd say. And with Hunter, killing tokens outside of using Spring Paws and Unleash the Hounds is a bit tough. Decks tend to go wide on board against you, and you are forced to do an Unleash the Hound's turn, and this is certainly going to help in those situations. This card really reminds me of Muster for Battle, which was a 3-mana kind of a weapon. It was a spell, but it gave you a 1/4 weapon in Paladin and summoned 3 1/1s, and that was a very, very strong card. This has obviously got 1 less durability, and you don't get all the tokens at once. But if you think about it, when you got the 1/1s that didn't have Rush in Paladin, it was like delaying a turn on which you can attack. For this card, if you swing first, you get the 1/1 initially, and then on your next turn you swing again, you've got 2 1/1s. So it's only really, in terms of minions that can attack, you're only losing out on 1 1/1, but you're also getting the fact that the first one has Rush, so on the turn you play this, you can attack immediately for that ping if you need it. And secondly, they have Beast synergy, which is pretty important in Hunter. You have things like Scavenging Hyena, which is a big one. It's going to be able to buff that up real nice. You have Houndmaster in decks which aren't running Master's Call, which could happen in one of Style Hunter decks. And you're running Dire Frenzy, Kill Command, Timberwolf, these sort of things. So if you play this on 3 and your weapon doesn't get destroyed, but your board gets cleared, you're going to still have a target for Dire Frenzy if you need it in those tempo style matchups. I know in a lot of matchups you want to have a specific target for Dire Frenzy. A lot of the time it's Fisher's Scalehide, but in some matchups it's just going to be good to have a 4/4 rush on turn 4 after playing this weapon, and it's going to give you the option to do that. I mean, just playing this card, it banks a lot of tempo, and it's tempo that your opponent often can't interact with outside of weapon removal. This is why weapons have been really strong a lot of the time, because if you're developing onto the board and you're trying to snowball the board, your opponent has ways to counteract that with either minion trades or removal, etc, etc. But with weapons, there's only one thing to stop them really, which is weapon removal. Freezes as well, but they're not really commonplace on the face right now. So it's very powerful to bank a lot of mana into a weapon, because it allows you to have swing turns later on. And this thing is definitely capable of swing turns. If you play this into a turn with a Timberwolf, the Locust that you get is going to have 2 attack, and then you've got a bunch of more mana left. You can put like a Hyena down, or maybe some Spring Paws as well, and you're going to be able to clean up a lot of the board and then make a big Hyena in the process, which is going to be really strong. Another thing this card can do, if you're running Deadly Shots, there becomes a lot of scenarios where you have to spend most of your mana on the Deadly Shot, but your opponent has like a couple of annoying 1/1s lying around, which you can't deal with. So you have to take like a 1 in 3 Deadly Shot or a 50/50 Deadly Shot, which is not ideal in a lot of circumstances. This card means if you've got this equipped, you can clean up some of those small things and then get a clean Deadly Shot target available. The only thing this is kind of bad at is just going pure face, which is something you do want to do as Hunter quite a bit, but in terms of board control, this is really nice. And with all the Lackey cards coming out, and with all these Reborn cards as well, there's going to be some Reborn cards which are going to be good, and having a 1 attack weapon or a 1/1 rush to be able to deal with the back end of those cards is going to be really nice. Yeah, I really like this card. I think it's very strong, and we'll probably see play in a bunch of Hunter decks. I guess the downside is it is a 3-cost card, and Hunter has 3-cost cards for days, so it might be a bit tricky with your mana curve in that regard. But I think it's strong enough that it will still find a home. Alright, next we have the Warlock legendary card, 5 mana 4/4 Dark Pharaoh Tekken, I guess, or Tekken. Battlecry: for the rest of your game, your lackeys are 4/4. So this is like the Rogue Quest Crystal Core, kinda, but just for lackeys, and it comes with a body. Currently in Warlock, Evil Genius is a very solid card. Evil Cable Rat is probably not needed, but with the new Lackey Synergy card that was released a bit ago, Evil Recruiter, you might want to be running extra Lackey cards anyway. And then this card becomes a lot more attractive. You can get a bunch more lackeys into your deck. I do believe Warlock will be getting another lackey generator. It seems that all the lackey classes are getting at least one card extra which generates lackeys, and I'm sure Warlock will be no different in that regard. So it depends how strong that card is, might add to the power level of this one. In terms of the effect, if you have lackeys on board, it's obviously quite nice tempo. That is going to happen a fairly decent amount if you're playing a zoo deck. But if you've got lackeys on board, there's another payoff card which destroys your lackeys in Evil Recruiter. So these cards kind of hurt each other in a way, because if you're eating your lackeys, they can't become 4/4s. And if they become 4/4s, you don't really want to eat them to make a 5/5. And you get +1/+1. So I guess it's a slight bonus. How many lackeys are you going to be able to buff with this card? It's not like you're in Rogue where you can generate a bunch more lackeys with Shadow Steps and Spirit of the Shark. Warlock are pretty much limited just to the ones they get off their battle cries. So I think I don't think this is the strongest of cards. I think even if you're running a lackey synergy deck with Evil Recruiter, this card just might not make the cut. It seems a bit too expensive and situational, and you want to be using your lackeys anyway. There were 2 new cards as well as these. Okay, Titanic Lackey. This is a 1 mana lackey, like they all are 1/1 and 1/1s. Battlecry, give a friendly minion +2 health and taunt. So this is a defensive style lackey, which haven't been seen before. I was kind of expecting some kind of health restoration lackey, but this is somewhat similar in that it's defensive as well. This thing is pretty nice if you go like Sludge Slurper turn 1 and you get this, because it allows your Sludge Slurper to value trade into your opponent's 1-drops or 2-drops. So it's quite a nice one to get on that. Like the Rush Lackey, Evolve Lackey, Spell Lackey, those ones aren't so great to get on turn 2. So this is a nice addition for Sludge Slurper. If you're playing a Rogue deck and you get this thing, it is a defensive tool, and Rogue is pretty bad on the defense right now. The only options they have really, they don't really play any taunts outside of Pirate Rogue. And the only taunt they play is Ziliax, which is also a heal card. So that's like their main defensive option. They're going to get this fairly often, given the amount of lackeys they generate. And yeah, it's just going to allow them to play defensive against decks that want to just ignore their board. Because after a while against Rogue, you're going to lose the board to all their lackey generating effects. And maybe you just have burn damage. Maybe you have a Doom Hammer. Maybe you're a rogue yourself playing Waggle Pick and you want to hit them in the face and then Leroy them. And this card is just going to prevent that when you get it. Other than that, you can use the taunt to stop your opponent trading into valuable things you've got. It seems like a solid lackey. I'd say it's better than probably the Evolve and probably better than the Rush a lot of the time. Situationally, the Rush is really strong, but on average, the Rush one's quite weak, I'd say. I think this is probably worse than Faceless Lackey, but this is just an out you have sometimes to stay alive against some decks when you really need a taunt, which is going to help in a ton of matchups. And this is the last card. Not too spectacular for a last card, but here it is. 2 mana 2/2 Demon Vile Fiend. It's got Lifesteal as well. So stats aren't very good. Does have Lifesteal, which is nice. I don't think it's going to see too much play. You can kind of compare it to Plated Beetle, which gained you 3 life, but it was a 2 mana 2/3, and you could run it with Beast Synergies. Beast Synergies were generally quite stronger when Plated Beetle was around, rather than Demon Synergies now. There might be more Demon Synergies that to be revealed, but I doubt it. I'd say this card's just probably not very good. Just being a 2/2 for 2 is just not that great as a 2-drop. And early game, you don't need the Lifesteal. There's other Lifesteal card effects around this mana cost with similar stats, which just haven't really seen too much play. Cheaty Ankle Biter for one of them. There's a 2/1, which you get a ping in it as well. and that's not really seen too much play either, so I don't think this thing will. Alright, that's all the cards for today. Stay tuned for more card reveals. We're getting about halfway through the set, I think. Tons of cards coming out every day, so I'll be doing much more set reveals, so stay tuned.